Hello. In the following, I would like to talk about some of the basics in the PCT system. What are the requirements to obtain an international filing date? Who has the right to file a PCT application? And with which office can you file a PCT application? And when you file, what are your choices in international searching authorities? So first of all, let's talk about obtaining an international filing date. And before I talk about the specific requirements, I would just like to remind you why it is so crucially important to obtain an international filing date on the day when you submit your international application. Most applicants file their PCT applications at the very end of the priority period, before the expiration of 12 months from the filing date of an earlier application of which they claim priority in the PCT application. And since they wait until the very end, they need to be absolutely certain that when they file their PCT application, they will on that day obtain an international filing date. Because if the filing date is not granted on that day, but maybe only on a later day, they risk losing their right to claim priority of their earlier application. So what are the requirements then to get this international filing date? Under Article 11 of the PCT, there are several requirements, and it starts out that you need to have something that we call a petition. It needs to be clear to the receiving office that you're filing an international application and not, for instance, a national patent application. You need to designate at least one of the contracting states of the PCT. Now that's easy to do because by using the request form which is available to you, you automatically designate all of our contracting states. So this is done automatically if you use the forms which are foreseen for filing an international application. You need to name in your international application at least one applicant. You cannot file an anonymous application. You need to at least disclose the name of one of the applicants. You need to have something in your application which on the face of it looks like a description and which looks like claims. Now this is really only a formality requirement because the formality examiners at the receiving office, they're not substantive examiners. They will look at formalities but not at the substance of your application. So if they see something which looks like a description, a paragraph, a numbered claim, they will consider on the face of it, there's something that looks like a description, there's something which looks like a claim, and they can, based on that, give you an international filing date. Whether your claims or your description are really well drafted, that's a totally different question, but that's not looked at by the receiving office who decides whether or not to grant an international filing date. The last requirement I would like to mention here is that you need to have at least one applicant in your PCT application who is either a national or a resident of a PCT contracting state. If you comply with all of these requirements, the receiving office can grant you an international filing date. Do note, there are some things that you don't need to get an international filing date, and that's why I didn't mention them earlier. So you don't need to pay the PCT fees up front. You have 1 month from the date of filing of your application to pay the fees, and subject to an invitation and a late payment fee, you can even pay them at a later stage within an additional month as stipulated in an invitation that you will get from the receiving office. You actually don't need to provide any signatures when you file your application, and you would still get an international filing date. You need to furnish these signatures later, but upfront to get the international filing date, you don't need to have a signature. Title of the invention, abstract, 2 things that you should furnish. They're not an absolute must to get an international filing date, and you can get them to the receiving office at a later stage. Drawings. Drawings aren't actually required to get an international filing date. That might be a bit surprising if you think of inventions in the mechanical field, for instance. It's very hard to imagine to ever be able to properly disclose your invention without including a drawing. And so in these cases, of course, you need to include your drawings at the time of filing. If you furnish them later, which is possible under the PCT, that would change in most cases your international filing date to the date of when you submit your latest submitted drawings. So if you need the drawings to disclose your application, make sure they're there at the time of filing. But if you think, for instance, of other inventions, maybe in the pharmaceutical chemical field, their drawings aren't absolutely necessary, and that's why the PCT doesn't make them a filing date requirement. Now, who can actually file an international application under the PCT? Well, there the PCT says any natural person or legal entity. Legal entity, we mean companies, etc. They can also be applicants on a PCT application. Do note, as I said earlier, that at least one of your applicants needs to be a national or resident of a PCT contracting state. If none of your applicants fulfills that latter requirement, you would not get an international filing date. Where can you file your international applications under the PCT? You can file, and that's the most typical choice of an applicant, you can file your application with a national office acting as a PCT receiving office. Now, some applicants are nationals or residents of a state which is also a member state of a regional patent arrangement. Think of the European Patent Organization or the Eurasian patent system. If you're such a national, you most likely have the option to also file your PCT application with that regional office, again in its function as a PCT receiving office. And the third option, which is actually available to all applicants, is to file with the receiving office of the International Bureau in Geneva, Switzerland. That option exists for all applicants, but you need to make sure before you file with us that you comply with any national security provisions that might apply in your particular country before filing with our receiving office. Once you filed your application, the question comes up, who can I now select to do the international search on my application? From which authority, from which ISA, International Searching Authority, will I obtain my international search report? And this is really driven by your choice of receiving office, because the receiving offices have specified those ISAs which are competent to do the search for applications filed with that particular receiving office. Now, some receiving offices only specified one office, other offices have specified multiple offices, and if they've specified multiple offices, then you of course have the choice, and you need to make that selection on the request form. You need to indicate which one of those ISAs are you choosing for your particular international application. So I hope in the short presentation I was able to provide you with some of the basics about the PCT, things that you absolutely need to comply with in order to get an international filing date. I explained to you who has the right to file an international application and where such an application can be filed and which ISAs you could possibly choose when you file your international application.